Well, I have so many things to tell you about in this project today that I'm going to try to make sure that I don't forget any of them. There are 4 distinct points that I want to make. Starting with number 1, now is a great time to go to your garden center, your nursery, wherever, and look for high quality plants that might be on sale. And that would be my first tip. And also look for things that you have wanted to have in your landscape anyway. In other words, be kind of intentional about it. So that would be my number 1 thing, and something that I just picked up at my nursery that were on sale was a beautiful Southern Living plant. It's a Crape Myrtle Delta Fusion, which is something else I've always wanted to talk to you about because I get asked quite frequently, Linda, would you talk about Crape myrtles and how you might use them in the landscape and other kinds of issues? Well, I'm going to address those as we go along. But first of all, let me talk about my reasoning for wanting to plant one of these right now from a design standpoint. Okay, it is early September. And this time of year, some of my plants are starting to put out, and even earlier than this, I would say in August, will sometimes put out a second flush of bloom. And as it turns out, that second blush of bloom from this Woodgelia, from this beautiful and fragrant Gertrude Jekyll rose, if you can kind of get a close-up on that, Stuart, from some tall phlox that I have, and from this pretty noisette rose, in addition to what seasonal color I have, like these angel wing begonias that hang from huge baskets in my landscape. You'll notice that these are all in a pink tonal range, kind of a more feminine palette. Now this year, many of you saw me prune up and pot some sunshine ligustrum into kind of a topiary form. That was tremendously popular. So many of you have sent me pictures of your projects with that plant. And this year, I loved the way they turned out. I underplanted them with some orange purslane, and the whole project was quite seasonal. But as much as I loved it, that orange kind of doesn't vibe and resonate along with these pinks. So I'm thinking about the future. And that would be my second tip. I'm planning for the future now in my garden projects, and not in terms of into perpetuity, like planting a tree for future generations, but thinking about my long-term garden plans for next year at this same time and throughout the summer. And I want plantings in those same baskets where I now have that ligustrum that more speak to the color palette of that section of my garden at this point in time. So for those baskets, which I will show you later, I'm starting a second project. That includes this wonderful Delta Fusion that I want to infuse into my landscape. Now, this time of year, I do look for plants that are on sale that are good quality plants, and certainly Southern Living plants really are. That said, just like we start getting to be a little bit tired as gardeners, I have noticed some of our retailers get to be a little bit lax in taking care of their plants. So when I look for a specimen, first of all, I want it to be a good quality plant, and I know Southern Living plants are, but I also want to make sure that the plant, even though it may look a little ragged, is not too stressed. And one thing I'm going to do to test that is I'm going to slightly pull it out of the pot and make sure that it's not too pot bound. And this one is not. It's got a loose root ball. It is putting out new growth. So I know it is a very healthy plant. And actually right now, again, I'm thinking more about the future than I'm thinking about right now. And so this leads me to my project. So my project is that I am going to take 2 of these Delta Fusion Crape Myrtles in this wonderful pinky hue that speaks to the other colors in my garden, in addition to its beautiful darker foliage. That's going to look fabulous. And I'm going to repot them in some larger containers. So this one, you can see, is pretty much larger in diameter than this one. Now you may ask, can you grow crepe myrtles in containers? And as I talk about this, I'm going to start loosening up the root ball a little bit. I have some garden debris on the bottom of this pot for added drainage and so that I don't have to use quite as much soil. I did water these beforehand, and now I am loosening up the root ball at the bottom. And this is fairly easy work because, as I said, this root ball is loose. Even still, even though I watered it, I can see that the inside is still dry. So I'm going to make sure that when I get this planted, that I am really going to soak it really well. Okay, so yes, you ask, you're actually planting this in a container. Crepe myrtles do well in containers. Now that said, you want to make sure they're in a very large container, and just because you're putting them in a container and because crepe myrtles are frost hardy in the south, I think lower parts of zone 6 and certainly into zone 7 and 8, that does not mean they'll necessarily be frost hardy in a pot. So I will bring these in to a greenhouse, to my friend's greenhouse, and they will overwinter. Now I could leave them outside, and I probably will, until it looks like it's going to get really, really cold. Okay, so that root ball is loosened up pretty well, and you can see that the top of the plant is now flush with the top of the pot. Now the other thing that I want to do, because as I've said many, many times, I am so much more now into really foliage than I am flowers, and now in addition to that, I'm even more into the trunks of plants and the stems of plants than just the plant itself. So what I'm going to do with this Delta Fusion is I'm going to prune it up some, and this is what you have asked me about. Now this one will have, it's not going to get inordinately tall because I'm keeping it in a pot, but it will get, if I planted it in the ground, 8 to 12 feet high, 4 to 6 feet wide. It's got a hardiness zone of 0 to 10 degrees. But again, I'm going to keep it kind of controlled. Now that said, later, I can always plant this in my landscape. Maybe if I move and I have a different garden, or I have a void in my garden that I want to fill with something beautiful like this, then I can certainly plant it in the ground later. In the meantime, it's going to be in a large enough pot that it shouldn't be a problem. So I am doing what I like to do, especially with plants that have beautiful canes and trunks, and that is I'm limbing it up. This makes it look less messy to me. It gives me room to underplant. So next year, when I put these out in my baskets, I will have room to underplant in this area around here, some seasonal color that will spill out over the side. I'm removing some of this internal twigginess, and it may not have brilliant form originally, but that's okay by me because, again, I'm thinking long term. And I'm just, and by the way, if you're not familiar with crepe myrtles, one of the things that is spectacular about them is the gorgeousness of the bark. Over time, mature crepe myrtle trees are just nothing short of breathtaking. And I don't know what a summer in the South would be without their gorgeous coloring and these wonderful, cheerful flowers when the rest of the garden is just gasping from the heat. I'm going to turn that around a little bit. I'm just doing some initial pruning so I can get an idea of what shape I want it to be. Now let's address something else, often referred to as Crape Myrtle. Now if I were planting these in the landscape and they got really large, I would want them to assume the natural form of a small tree. Oh, I'm sorry, but I was just interrupted. Stuart, turn around. Well, sorry, we just missed it. There was a huge hummingbird right behind you. And it was heading for that Miss Lemonabilia there. Sorry to interrupt. As I was saying, Crape Myrtle. So Crape Myrtle is basically when you don't let a Crape Myrtle tree or shrub assume its natural shape in pruning, and you literally just lop it off so that there's nothing but exposed trunks and canes, very truncated and blunt, and it looks awful. For a number of different reasons, it just looks like it's been assaulted, but also because it doesn't achieve its natural form, which is beautiful. So if I were pruning this in the landscape in late winter or early spring, I would try to just kind of tip prune it and deadhead it. So here's an example. Instead of, on this branch, instead of doing just a blunt cut like this, I would just tip prune it and deadhead the very tips of it, so it will put out new flowers and new growth. But I am not just committing Crape Myrtle and just chopping it off. If you are doing that to control its size, then I would recommend look for a cultivar that at its mature height will maintain that size versus trying to manage it yourself. It will not only make for a prettier plant, it will also make a lot less work for you. So you can kind of see how pretty that looks, I think. Stuart, can you see that? I'm gonna kind of look around. I see a little bit more twigginess in here because what I want is to be able to see through the plant. The other reason this is kind of helpful is it will give it better air circulation, and that will help prevent things like scale and powdery mildew that sometimes crepe myrtles can be prone to. Okay, so I've got this in the pot. It's all loosened up. Its root ball is loosened up. I'm gonna put in just a bit of some slow release fertilizer. Not a whole lot, but just a little bit, because I do want it to put out root growth over the winter. Okay, now I've got some potting mix here. This is just a good quality potting mix. This one, can't remember where I got it, but I'm just going to really beautifully tuck all of this soil around the base. Now here's another tip, you guys. When you get plants, larger plants, in these black nursery pots, save them. This is a really sturdy pot, and I don't want to discard it and have it end up in the landfill because it's valuable in my garden. This is a great size to set down into those baskets, and it's also sturdy, rather thick, so it will protect the root ball. And I also like it because if I wanted to, it would also make a good candidate for doing a faux finish on this pot. And I will put links. Sometimes you guys, I fail to put the links and then you remind me, but I will put links below to that Sunshine Ligustrum planter that we did, and I'll also put a link to how to faux finish your pots. So that looks really wonderful. And then you can just imagine how beautiful it will look when I have something in this color palette this pretty pink or whatever that will cascade down the side and over the edge of the basket next year. So again, I am thinking about the future. Trying to think if I'm covering all of the tips. So number one, look for really good, healthy plants on sale this time of year. Number two, make sure from a design perspective that whatever you plant matches your design vision. Number three, yes, these crepe myrtles can be planted in pots with certain considerations. And number four, make sure that once you get them where you want them, that you prune them accordingly. Now, we are going to work our way around. I'm going to really make sure that tucks in. And notice, you guys, there's a hole right there I missed. One of the reasons we really tuck that soil down into the cracks and crevices. Now, I'm not going to water this till I get this into place because it will be too heavy. That's another advantage of saving these black pots, because now I'm going to transport this. Stuart, and forgive me, we're doing lots of shooting today, so you might see some camera action around. And I'm going to bring it over here. To this area. Now, it's cloudy right now. These things aren't in bloom. These are the sunshine ligustrum that we worked on earlier. And then I have these two baskets that have large pots in them. And I did the same thing here this year. With these large pots, I'm not going to try to wiggle my way out of that one, but you can see here, can you see that there's a large plastic pot in there? I'm going to come over to this side. This one is a little bit smaller and easier for me to remove because I want to show you this. This is kind of a cheat, but it works brilliantly. And I'm going to take this out. Show you how I'll be able to just drop in this color. See how perfectly that pot fits the width of this basket? These will get taller by next year. I will plant around it a profusion of bloom. I'll probably reconfigure all of this, but I'm thinking about what I want it to look like next year. So think about the future. Lots of good tips there. I hope you guys were able to absorb them all. And now I'm going to get back to planting my second one of this beautiful Delta Fusion Southern Living plant, and I will put a swipe up link to the Southern Living plants below. So there you go. I love it. It will also, one more thing, guys, look how pretty this dark foliage looks against this really bright yellow sunshine ligustrum. Okay, I'm going to proceed. See you guys later.